Welcome to Top 3 with Lystrata Law, where we explore the intersection of the law with your life and business journey. At Lystrata Law, we're committed to changing how you view lawyers and the legal profession. So in this podcast, we have real conversations with real people about real things, not just legalese. We'll talk with those who have faced the challenges you're facing so you can learn from their experience. And we'll share 3 easy to remember takeaways on each episode. Yeah, we'll talk about the law, but we'll mostly talk about life and business and how the law overlaps with almost everything that you do. I'm Geneva Vasquez, the owner and principal attorney of Lystrata Law, a law firm focused on serving estate planning and small business planning clients, and I'm your host. As a quick disclaimer, I'm a lawyer, but I'm not your lawyer unless we've entered into a written agreement to work together. I'm licensed in North Carolina, New Mexico, South Carolina, Florida, and New Jersey. I can serve clients in those states. Nothing said here today is intended to be legal advice, and this information is for educational purposes only. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome special guests Shauna Splain and Leisha Dodson with the Star Insurance Group. Star Insurance Group is an independent insurance agency with specialists in property and casualty for commercial and personal lines of insurance. As an independent agency, they can do the shopping for you, sorting through multiple carriers and coverage options to find the best coverage at the best price to fit your personal and business insurance needs. At Star Insurance, they work with their clients side by side, building a strong relationship to get to know you and better understand your insurance needs. Welcome, Shauna and Leisha.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Happy to have you guys with us.
We are happy to be here.
You are our first tag team guest, so this is exciting.
That's what we consider ourselves to be, is a bit of a tag team. You know, she brings the beauty, I bring the brawn.
That isn't true, Leisha. But so I want you guys to just start out by telling us a little bit about who you are, what your business is, and what you do.
Okay, Shauna, you want to take it away?
Sure. I started an independent agency in 2019 because I wanted a different way to work with clients. But I have a background in commercial insurance for about 15 years. And then I brought Leisha on as a partner to help out because you can't do everything alone. So we work together in building this business. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. And my background is actually in nonprofits and healthcare and HR. And when I came on board with this one a little while ago, I felt that it was perfect because of, one, the values that she's built this company on that I could stand behind. And 2, we do actively help people manage things that matter the most to them, and that's their assets and making sure that they're protected. And I think that's incredibly important work. So yeah, that's a little bit about us. We actually do cover multiple states, North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, Ohio, Georgia. Who am I missing? Florida, and Florida. So we're happy to help anyone who needs any help with their personal and their commercial insurance needs.
One thing that I love about your model, and that's something that you stress, is the personal relationship. And you guys know that's something that I am really big on in my practice too, which is really getting to know your clients, right? And not treating each client as just a number or a separate transaction, but understanding them and their business and their family. Because that's something that helps you to better identify their needs. And so is that part of why you wanted to build this out this way?
Yeah, so we're not just going to write a policy and then you're not going to hear from us again. So one of the things that we really pride ourselves on is getting to know the clients by keeping in touch all throughout the year. So you're going to have a policy review. You're going to hear from us about halfway through your policy term so we can check in, because nobody's family stays the same. Nobody's business stays the same. So we want to know about those risks. Like, do you have a new teenager driving? Right. Or is he going to be driving in a few months? We should probably know about that. Or are you adding an operation to your business? And that's something too.
Yeah, and also because most of our business, our commercial lines are actually, all of them are small businesses. We too are a small business, so we know that it takes communities to support those small businesses. So we're not just looking at them at their insurance needs, we're also looking for all the different types of resources, all the relationships that we've managed to create and build upon to be able to help them in growing their business. You know, that's part of the reason why I think that people find that, you know, you can go to a big box insurance company and you can insert your information in and they can spit out something, but they don't really get to know who you are and what you do. They're not going to grow with you and they're not going to be actively working to help you in growing your business. And that's something I know that we both stand behind.
Exactly.
It's helping others.
Any of our business clients can call us and say, hey, we're doing a grand opening this weekend. Do you want to come? Yes, we do. We want to be involved.
Yeah, definitely. We want to make sure that they are solid and are thriving. And if we can play a small part in that, we're delighted to do it.
Yeah, I love that. And that's, you know, a value that I believe so strongly in, is being in the role as a trusted advisor. You know, is like, even if you are just helping your client in another facet, like maybe they just need to get connected to something or they don't really know where they might have a gap. Being somebody who's a trusted resource that they can call and they know they're going to talk to you on the phone and not have to go through 37 prompts of press 1, press 7, press 9, you know, and there's a lot to be said for that actual personal relationship.
I totally agree. You know, one of the great things, I've watched this one in action and it's really wonderful when I see her, the way that she dives in. You know, when I mentioned before about the big bot situation, a lot of times people just assume that if you just put just a little bit of information in that, they automatically know exactly what you need to get covered. And, you know, one of our biggest things that we do is that we ask a lot of questions. And sometimes there is a back and forth bit of a conversation to making sure, that's because we want to make sure that they are abundantly covered, because a lot of people presume, but then they don't read their policies or understand what their endorsements are or what the exclusions are. Then they are setting themselves up for future issues that they probably could have just been rectified if they'd been educated better.
Yeah, so that's something I want to ask you about is, you know, you're an independent agency, right? And we've mentioned big box. And so for an average listener who, you know, hears tons of insurance commercials on TV constantly, or maybe is getting pop-ups on their phone, you know, what's the difference in being an independent agency versus, you know, maybe a brand that is all over their news feed?
You look at it.
So there's two types of agencies for consumers, and that's a captive agency like State Farm, Allstate, Farm Bureau, and they're captive because they only have those products that they can sell. An independent agency actually works for the consumer. So our clients are our clients, not the insurance company. So we represent multiple carriers and we can shop around for them. We're not obligated to keep certain carriers like they are.
Right. You know, what that does, and this is no diss against any captive agents or agencies that are out there. There's some really great people that do work in the captive industry. But for us as an independent, it's kind of great to be able to, you know, one, shop it around, to be able to get a sense of what the appetites are for each of the independent carriers, so that, you know, we're finding what's best for them in the end, and not necessarily what the bottom line is for our agency or even the insurance carrier. So it allows us to be a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for?
Creative.
Creative, yes, creative is the word I'm looking for, and especially when insurance, or at least as insurance agency, we're about problems resolving. And making sure that you're getting what you need at the price that you can afford.
Well, and I think something too that's a little bit different is you're not really trying to sell something. And what I mean by that is I feel very comfortable saying this, that I have used you guys before for even just on a home owner's policy, right? And one thing that was different than other experiences was that you guys were able to go through and look at everything that was available in the market and say, Geneva, you have a good deal here, you have a bad deal here, right? And you're straightforward and honest and saying, like, you shouldn't change the coverage that you have on this right now because you already have a good option.
Right.
Or this is a way better option for you. So you're really, I mean, from my personal experience, your interest is only that of your customer.
We
Right.
really appreciate that. You know, it means a lot. When we do when we ask for that information for a quote, we know that there's a lot of trust that's involved in doing that. And yeah, you know, we do this as a business, and we want to make, you know, we want to make money, but we also want to retain your trust. So it's vitally important that we are always communicating what's fair, what's true, and making sure that you're getting what you need. And so sometimes if we're not that, then we want to make sure that you have that soft landing and not just leave you high and dry. And you know, like I can give you a quick example. We had a woman who had been with the same carrier for 3 years or so, hadn't even heard from them, and she wanted the review. And when she got the review, we managed to see that she was giving away at least $2,000 extra a year in her insurance. Now, here's the funny part. She didn't go with us. She took that information and she went over back to her carrier and say, "Hey, you need to quote my insurance again." She got some of the savings that she was looking for, but you know, it would have been great to have been able to get her business, but in the end, we did right. We did right by her, showing her and educating her on what opportunities that she was missing. And I know that we're going to build some loyalty out of that in the end.
Value, right? You're adding value.
Yeah, I hope that it doesn't take 3 years in her to chase her agency in order to be able to get the savings. But we don't believe that you should chase us. We reach out to you on a regular.
Yeah. And I mean, that's something I think that's really important, is to not be on autopilot with your insurance coverages and to constantly be making sure you're getting the best deal, the best coverage. But, you know, as you guys know, one of the things that I do in working with small business owners, whether it's through a new business audit or an existing business audit, is I ask a series of questions to try to develop a risk assessment, a risk overview. And, you know, from my perspective, there are really 4 main areas where businesses have a lot of risk. There's legal risk, right? Which is obviously, I'm very tuned into that, which is either their business formation, agreements, contracts, all of those aspects. There's financial risk, where, you know, financials are not being maintained the way they should be, or, you know, all of those different aspects. There's tax risk, where there's potential tax liability or people aren't doing their taxes correctly. And then lastly, on that 4-prong approach, is there's insurance, right? And insurance is a big part of the risk analysis. And one thing that I have clients do is go through, and I have a list of maybe 30 different types of coverage, and check off, you know, what do they have for themselves individually and what do they have for the business, right? And so one of the reasons I wanted to have you guys on was to really help lay a foundation of what it means for a business owner. And I think, you know, there's several different categories of a small business owner. We know, of course, there are truly small businesses that are solos, or, you know, just a small partnership. Maybe there's no employees. There's even side hustlers who might still have a basic 9-to-5, but are doing business activities outside of that. And then we get into the little, you know, a little bit larger category, where maybe there's some staff or large staff, or of course much bigger, where maybe there's you know, enormous team, right, running the operation. So each of these businesses have a totally different risk assessment and analysis that is in each of those 4 buckets, but especially in the insurance bucket, because that profile looks very different depending on what the business looks like. Yeah. And so what I wanted you guys to do was to help give a little bit of a primer or an overview of just like basic, you know, business insurance concepts that a new business owner, maybe that doesn't know much about this space, should know when they're starting their business, or, you know, want to get their business cleaned up and start to reduce that risk profile.
Yeah. So insurance is the transfer of risk. So you're asking the insurance company in exchange for a premium to take on that burden. So that contract outlines everyone's responsibilities there, and the most important coverage a business can have is just basic general liability. That transfers the risk of any third party's property damage or bodily injury. So even if you think I work at home, I don't come into contact with too many people, at some point you can be sued for anything, right? You don't have to be negligent or even liable for it. And as you said earlier, the defense costs, I think we were talking about this before we started, defense costs are expensive. Your insurance company will defend you against those claims. So that's a huge benefit to having insurance, because otherwise you will have to pay for that yourself.
The lawyers, right? The lawyers. I mean, a big part of why we have your industry is because of my industry.
So that's the most basic policy, and it doesn't have to be expensive. It can be rated based on your sales or sometimes square footage, but you know, that's the most basic you can get. And then depending on what else you have, if you have some property, you know, equipment that you use to run your business, or if you have a location where you lease or own, you definitely need some property coverage there. And then depending on your vehicle situation, if you have a car and you're driving around with a sign on it, you really need a commercial auto policy. You should not be driving around for business on a personal auto policy.
Right.
Well, and just to add my 2 cents about from a legal perspective on that, you know, regardless of the size of your business, where someone sees that sign on your car, they're going to think you have deep pockets, right? And so it doesn't matter whether somebody is successful in a lawsuit, just the sheer fact that you're sued alone will eat up a tremendous amount of money, time, you know, stress, all of that is part of it. And I think you raise a really good point with that. I mean, there are plenty of people who do that because they know maybe there's some tax advantage for doing that, but there's additional risk.
Right.
Absolutely.
You know, also, I'm sure if you're going to mention this already, but the type of business is, you know, it's very important where it's classified. Depending on the industry, you know, there's certain type of coverages that you need to have in place. Like for instance, we had one who recently who was misclassified as a business and opened themselves up to a huge amount of liability because they weren't covered. And so we had to go back in and correct that because they were misclassified from one business that was, we won't get too specific, but one business that had a considerably lower threshold of liability compared to another, like that one would handle alcohol. And that could have eventually, you know, it intentionally unfortunately messed him up. And you know, if something had happened and he had served and his liquor liability wasn't there, then it would have been disastrous for him. And it really was up to that insurance company to do the right thing and make sure that they were classified appropriately.
A lot of businesses don't come back from a big claim.
No.
I think it's about 40% that don't ever reopen.
And, you know, we would hope too for those businesses at minimum, at least they're formed correctly and they have some protection of their personal assets, but you would be surprised. There are lots of people who still to this day are running businesses as sole proprietors, and they don't really understand that what that really means is if something happens, even if you are just a lawn guy and something happens, you're putting all of your personal assets at risk, your family's assets, your family's home, your everything that you own.
And you can still have commercial insurance in a sole proprietor name, but yes, you definitely.
At least the insurance is one line of defense for that. If you are a sole proprietor, you should at minimum, you know, be insured to the max.
Right, right.
That's really your only line of defense on your personal assets.
And there's one more policy that's really important based on your comment about the type of business. Like, for example, for you, you have a lawyer's liability policy, like an errors and omissions. We have errors and omissions. Realtors, any professional line that could cause financial harm to somebody should have a professional liability policy.
Dentists, right? Anybody who's professionally licensed, that's a really important add-on to their risk portfolio. So talk to me now a little bit about, so we talked about general liability, right, for businesses. And what about workers' comp insurance? So is that something that you guys do as well when you're dealing with small businesses?
Absolutely, yes. So the state of North Carolina doesn't require it until you have 3 or more employees. However, even if you have 1 employee, We always quote it. We always want you to have it because your employee
Please.
can still get hurt.
Please.
So we will recommend it, but we can't require you to have it until you have
And
proof.
that's something really important to note here, you know, with workers' comp, these restrictions and thresholds on who has to have it by law, mandatory, is very different state by state, really different. I mean, there's charts of comparison that you can Google to try to get a basic primer, but it is very important that that is one of the first things that you explore with your agent or your business attorney to make sure you're in compliance with the law.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
And we know state by state who would be required to carry it.
Yeah.
And just because it's required at 3 and more doesn't mean we don't want you to have it. We still want you to have it.
Right.
Right.
And then they have to think about the penalty that that you set yourself up for when you don't have it. Even though you might think that that it's making you a few dollar savings here and there, in the end it doesn't, because the fines are, you know, pretty outrageous, especially here in the state of North Carolina.
Yeah. And so now what about a really, really small business, you know, maybe just a partnership, just 2 people, or a solopreneur, somebody that maybe doesn't even have staff? What are some types of business coverage that you would recommend that they have?
A really small business like that, like us, we're a partnership. We have a business owner's policy. BOP is the short word for that. And that includes 3 coverages in it. That's your business interruption, a little bit of property, and your general liability. So it's just a way to package everything together for the small business. And you can add on coverage to that. So you can add endorsements, and all an endorsement does is change your policy. So they add this coverage. So for example, we could add some auto coverage for fired and unowned, or we could add some cyber liability. Carriers are pretty flexible about the BOP policies and what you can add. But it's a really good way to get started, and it's pretty cost effective depending on your industry.
Right. And that's why it's important to ask a lot of questions, because we want to be able to make sure that they're covered, not just in the basics, but what else should we anticipate? What else should we expect? What else could potentially offer some risk that might need to be covered in the event that something happens?
Now, you mentioned cyber, and that's really, I guess, a newer advent. Really, it's not something that's been around forever, is cyber coverage. Talk a little bit about what that is.
Cyber is ever changing, and you know, nothing is standard per carrier. Each carrier has different coverage forms. So whenever I quote a cyber, I have to read each one to know exactly what's covered, because they're all different. But your basic ones will cover network security. If you have any personally identifiable information, PII, you should really consider it. So even information out on the cloud, or if you keep it in, even if you keep credit card information and paper copies of social security numbers, you know, that's PII. That could, you know, do you remember a few years ago, the Charlotte Mail that was all over the road and had medical documents?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's a liability.
Well, you know, one thing I say is to, I mean, what was it? Maybe it's been a while, but Equifax, was it Equifax? You know, one of the biggest, you know, this huge company that has an enormous amount of data, you know, if they can, and I can't imagine what their budget is for security, cybersecurity. I mean, if they can get hacked, then a really small business, especially one that has no tech or cyber budget, can get hacked, you know? So although the cyber coverage might not, you know, totally rectify the situation, it definitely is something that is a big help in if that were to happen.
It will help cover the cost of letting everybody know. So mailing that out to them and getting in touch with them, and then providing them with some protection, kind of like through Equifax, actually, on the back end, you know. Credit report monitoring is what we're looking for, but that is Equifax, so it's, which is funny. But in fact, one of the largest breaches was Target quite a few years ago, and Target wasn't hacked. The way that the hackers got in was through an air conditioning vendor that went to one of the Target locations. So, you know, I'm certain that air conditioning vendor didn't have cyber coverage. Even if he did, I don't think it would come close to being a blip on Target's radar of, going after him for that. But that was a big deal. And that just shows you how it's even the little guy that can get hacked.
Yeah.
So now, what about umbrella policies and umbrella insurance? That's something that we talk about a little bit. But who might need that, and what does it do? What is it for?
If you're a business, we would recommend umbrella because it sits over a few of your policies.
Right.
It would sit over your general liability limits. So if you have a $1 million per occurrence policy, it would extend that to $2 million.
And with personal, it's typically connected to auto, and that's just covering the excess of what your original policy will cover initially, and then anything in excess that any additional things that come up that are excess of what the insurance agreed to pay out for that occurrence.
So the attachment point is the limit of your base policy. For commercial, it will also sit over the commercial auto and the employer's liability portion of your workers' comp policy. For personal, it would also sit over the liability portion of your homeowner's coverage.
Right.
But the attachment.
So let's break that down a little bit. So in other words, if you have a policy that covers $100, right? I'm just going to use like simple numbers here, simple basic. If you, and help me to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. So if you have $100, and that's where your coverage limit is, then the umbrella is going to kick in for anything that might be over the $100.
Let's do more realistic numbers.
You tell me, Sean.
I understand what you're saying, but go ahead.
For your personal limits, they're not going to sit over $100,000 policy. You probably have to have a minimum of $250,000 for liability, or sometimes even $500,000. So if you have a claim that reaches $500,000, which could easily happen,
yeah,
that's the attachment point for your umbrella policy, and it would kick in at that point. Same for commercial.
So do you have a story that you could share about that? Just about where you've seen umbrella coverage really kind of save the day? I mean, have you seen that?
I haven't seen it yet in my business, although I know an example of when it would have really helped.
Yeah.
And
tell me that. A horror story is good.
A personal friend of mine who was in a horrific car accident. She was traveling on Billy Graham, which is a two-way highway, and a car came across the median and hit her head on. That driver passed away, and there were 3 people in that car. The driver passed away, and the person that hit him, that caused him to go across the median, stole the car. And so she ran off. So hit and run. This guy, he's no longer on earth. My friend has a broken foot, a bum knee, and she stands on her feet all day. That's her job. So the driver that passed away didn't have insurance. And you're not getting anything from somebody that's a hit and run, because that's just, so her insurance had to pay out for that. Her medical bills were $50,000 right away just to get her to the hospital, and then fixing her foot. I think she had 2 surgeries. And then, she wasn't working like she could before, and she still can't. So that's an example of where an umbrella policy may have been beneficial for her if it sits over the appropriate coverage on her policy.
And that's somebody who wasn't even a business owner.
He is a
right?
business owner.
Oh,
Yeah.
she is a business owner. Okay. So that has an even bigger impact than for her.
Right. But it sits over liability. So for for her, it would have had to have sat over her uninsured, underinsured, uninsured motorist coverage. And if she had that, she would have gotten more. They maxed out her policy limit.
Yeah, it doesn't take much to accumulate a huge amount of damage, especially when you have, pileups, multiple cars, sue happy people, you get that little whiplash thing going on. It can all tally up pretty quickly.
I mean, that's why I say, we explore the intersection of the law with your life and business journey on this podcast, because there's no part of your life that is exempt from the law. Right. And so, and lawyers, and a large part of how our society runs is because of lawyers. And exactly like you said, I mean, it doesn't take much for those expenses to start to mount. And so the best thing that you can do is really You know, I know it's hard sometimes for people to chew off a monthly bill, but in the end, it's really one of the cheapest investments you can make to really extend your protection.
Right.
Umbrella is not cost prohibitive. It's a pretty reasonable policy.
Yeah, definitely. It's just an added layer of insurance.
Yeah, it's
So-
a very risk.
I want to talk a little bit about, now I want to transition to your top three.
Oh, okay.
So for the top three,
This top three thing before, and came up with like 14. So yeah, I'll try. We'll try.
there's a lot you want to share about insurance. You're passionate.
We could probably write the Bible right now on things that we could share and help people unlearn about insurance.
That's interesting to unlearn. I hadn't thought about that. So what I want to do, I want to take it from the perspective of somebody who really doesn't know much about shopping for insurance. Maybe they've just always done kind of like a basic, you know, Progressive, something that they do quickly online, and that's like the extent of their shopping for insurance. So for your basic individual or your basic business owner, we'll kind of make it broad and you can go wherever you want with it. What are your top three takeaways that somebody who's shopping for insurance or looking for additional coverage should know?
Well, okay, let's see if we can pull this one out.
Well, I think the first one would
Okay.
be if you're shopping online, you don't really know what you're getting.
Right.
Unless you have an insurance license and you know, but you know, the population really doesn't. So you don't know what you're getting. So you could be getting really low limits and not know it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the takeaway from that is you need to know what you're signing up for coverage for. You can't just assume that everything is covered just because you paid this certain amount. If you haven't reviewed that policy to actually see what the actual endorsements or exclusions that are included, what they say that they would cover and what up to, and under what conditions, then you're basically just giving your money away every month. So you really, that's number one, know what your coverage is for.
Now, I want to ask you a quick like sub question on that, because those documents are not easy to read, right? They're written by lawyers. They're all legalese. So if somebody has a current policy and they want to know what it means better, who should they talk to? Can they come to somebody like you and say, help me review my current coverages? I need to know what these limits are.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
You can schedule a review with us. We'll go over anybody's policy with them to point out anything. They don't have to be current customers or even future customers. We'll just point them in the right direction.
Great. So sorry to derail you on your list.
Okay. It's okay. It's okay. Number two, we want you to understand that it's not us making the decisions when it comes down to the rates that we return back to you. That insurance carriers do have appetites and non-appetites for certain things. So that's one of the things that I put in there, why zip code matters, why certain little things matter. When we submit that information, it's taken through a number of different levels, how it's rated. Those rates are sometimes they're based on things like gender, believe it or not, in this day and age, marital status, and specifically zip code. Like if you live in an area that has been prone to a lot of break-ins, then that might factor into that insurance, how the insurance is rated. A whole host of other things, but some of the things that, you know, that we're not the ones who are making those decisions. We're trying to work on your behalf to find out the best option based on the actual reality of what's in your life. So if you've got a few accidents that you forgot about, that's going to come up. If you've had, if you totaled your car, that's going to come up. If you have made a claim in your household, like you had an accident in the household and you said, hey, I'm just going to file that with my homeowner's insurance, that's going to come up. So it's good to know that that we're there to help explain why those things are affecting your current rate. but also to know that you should always be reviewing it too, because things can change. Appetites of insurance carriers can change. Um, some of those factors, those rates are sometimes even based on things that are outside of you specifically. It could just be based on how the company is structured.
That's interesting. So in other words, you know, if you shop for a policy with all things being equal this year, 2 or 3 years from now, you might get a totally different assessment because the insurance companies have now said, we weigh this as a higher risk or we weigh this as a lower risk. Their variation can affect you for positive or for negative.
Exactly. I mean, it's sort of like, you know, people, you know, and this was fascinating to me. I just find this part fascinating. It's the, like the difference between a stock stock-based insurance company versus a mutual. And like if it's a stock one, you know, they might have a really great year and then all their profits they're getting from the stock market. But if the stock market is down, then they're going to make sure that they're going to hold feet to fire to make sure they're not carrying any high risk that they can't support. And so that will affect the people that they will decide that they will provide insurance to, or at least how much they want to charge them for that premium in order to cover them. So yeah, it does change. It doesn't stay the same. And I think that part's actually kind of fascinating. I'm kind of nerdy about that.
Well, and again, it reiterates the point that you gotta view this stuff as a living, breathing thing. You can't just go on autopilot because, I mean, when we shopped with you guys for our home insurance coverage, we literally saved $400 in 1 year. And that's, you know, on one policy. So, you know, it is a big deal because that over time really adds up if you're just throwing your money into something that you shouldn't be.
Right.
And that you could be saving it.
We even got you more coverage because that had to be out as well. So yeah, that was
better coverage for less money. So that was, you know, I'm a raving fan of a customer, and that's part of the reason I wanted to have you guys on because it's important to shop. It really is.
You could see all the blushing going on back here. We're burning up.
And I would add that it doesn't mean shop with different agents. It means shop with different companies, because if we do a shopping for you and you go somewhere else and they do a shopping for you, the insurance companies know. So
that's the best thing about working with you, right? Is because you have access to shop on behalf for the client, right? You're doing the shopping really, and you can figure out what's out there as far as, you know, the different carriers. And it's not something that you as the consumer have to go, you know, call 50 different agencies to do that.
Right. And then I guess one last point, and I thought about this and really did it. And it's kind of important for us because this is part of usually our pressure points, providing complete information. It is not the role of the insurance agency to know exactly what's in your hearts and minds and what's your date of birth or anything like that. We need complete information in order to be able to present for the carrier and come back with the information that fits for you. When we get incomplete information, that's when, you know, we have to kind of go back and revisit and re-educate, and it's a back and forth. So for us, it's so important that, you know, when we're asking these questions, it's not that we're trying to be nosy. We're just wanting to make sure that we get all the information that we can. So when we're asking for name and date of birth and address and such, these are not things that are going to be sold out to anyone else. We protect that information, and we're using that to make sure that we're getting the appropriate quote.
So to recap, understanding what it is that you have,
right?
You know, knowing what your limits are, knowing what's actually covered, and if you don't, getting with somebody like you to review those policies and make sure you actually know what's covered, especially if you're a business owner. Number 2 is to know that sometimes the appetites of the carriers change, and so you should be looking for options, you know, regularly, and to know that price isn't falling on you. It's because there's these ebbs and flows in the risk, and what those appetites are for risk. And then the third is that you should try to give best and complete information when you're shopping, right? It also makes it faster too, to go through the process when you're, I mean, this is not something that's painstaking. It can be people put things off that they think are going to be harder than they actually are. But this is something that I think you guys really help to make the process easy, and you do the majority of the legwork. Filling out a one-pager application is not the end of the world, but to do it as best as possible to make the process quicker.
Right.
Exactly.
And it's only hard once. The upfront is really hard.
Yeah.
But at the renewal, we'll hold your hand a lot.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. And I mean, I can attest to the personal service that you guys give. And now for let's say we have listeners, because I know for certain we have listeners that are not living in any of the states that you guys work in. So if they wanted to find an independent insurance agency that's similar to you, maybe I know we have listeners in New Mexico, for example, how would they go about doing that? I mean, is it a simple Google search where you just say, independent insurance agency, or what's the best way to get in touch with somebody like you who can help shop for them?
I would actually go to trustedchoice.com and do a search through there. They're in every state, and that's through an organization called the IIA, Independent Insurance Agents Association, IIA.
Yeah, IAAC.
And it's a nonprofit group that assists independent agents, and they can make sure that whomever you go with is, affiliated with them. We are a trusted choice agency. So you'll see that logo on our stuff as well, but that's a really good way to know that they've been vetted.
Great. That's a good resource. And so how can our listeners find you?
We are starinsgroup.com, or you can give us a call, 980-220-2257. Or you can email either one of us. We're on the website.
Right. Or you can just straight up go to Facebook. You can go to Instagram. You can look us up on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
We are 1,000% accessible. And as you know, Geneva, I'm always available by text. But the clearest cut way, of course, if you're needing a quote, is that if you go to our website, you'll have a clear portal to be able to go straight to for your home and auto. But if you're looking for something for your business, it's best to be able to reach out to us directly, because we want to ask the right questions so that we're able to start that quote right away.
Awesome. And we'll be sure to link
and our email, our agent email as well. I'm sorry, and that's agent@starinsgroup.com.
Well, we will go ahead and link to all of that info. We'll put all your contact info in the show notes, and be sure to make that accessible to our listeners so they can reach you with their questions and get all their coverages reviewed and get on the path to shoring up their insurance risk. So thanks so much for being with us, guys. This has been really, really informative and helpful. And you're just a beacon and wealth of insurance knowledge. I appreciate it.
Well, we want to thank you, Geneva. Honestly, without people like you in this world who actually care about the individual, making sure that they get covered and that they're looking at their not just their legal, but their everything to make sure that things that they value are covered, then, we wouldn't know what to do. So I know what the value that you provide to a lot of your families and individuals and helping them. And it's good to be in good company.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I appreciate that. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of Top 3 with Lastrada Law. And thanks to our guests, Shauna Splain and Leisha Dodson of Star Insurance Group, for sharing their top 3 takeaways with us. Tune in to new episodes of Top 3 with Lastrada Law each month and catch all the other shows on the Sally Boys Podcast Network. Subscribe to the Sally Boys Podcast Network wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. To find out more about Lastrada Law, you can visit us at www.lastradalaw.com. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, or Twitter. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.